The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
Welcome from the General Assembly and the City of Richmond. I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications. And a very warm welcome to our guest, Delegate Scott Surovell from the 44th District in Northern Virginia. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Tell us to what extent, if any, your district was changed as a result of redistricting, at least in terms of your geographical boundaries.
Well, redistricting did change my district a whole lot. My district moved a little bit to the north. It picked up the communities of what's called Holland Hill. Well, it's the Kirkside Precinct, which includes Holland Hills, the Kirkside neighborhood, Marlin Precinct, which includes Villa May, Marlin Forest, a lot of Quander Road. And I also picked up a whole new area, which is Hayfield. About 1,000 people live over in the Hayfield part of Fairfax County on the other side of Huntley Meadows Park. And my district lost the Huntington area, and it also lost a few homes, about 1,000 houses down near Mount Vernon in what's called Westgate Precinct along Doe Creek. But otherwise, the heart of my district remained intact. I still represent basically the heart of the Route 1 corridor from the city of Alexandria all the way to Fort Belvoir. But I probably got about 15,000 new people in the district, probably lost about 15,000.
So is Hayfield High School in your district now?
High school isn't. Hayfield Elementary is.
Okay.
Hayfield High School is right across the street from the elementary school. So I have a border with Hayfield High School, but I have some of the students, but not the actual school.
Yeah, I used to live in that area
really?
some years ago, yes. Well, what about your committee assignments? What committees do you serve on?
Well, last term, the Speaker assigned me to be on the Science and Technology Committee and also on the City, Counties, and Towns Committee. This year, on the first day, he announced committee assignments at the beginning of session, and he kept me on the same two committees, added me to a third committee, which is Militia, Police, and Public Safety. And those are the three I'm currently on. A little bit of new responsibility.
Great, great. Now, I take it that the issues from your constituents have not changed significantly, however.
No, the biggest issue in my district is the sort of the condition on the Route 1 corridor. Basically, Route 1, it needs a lot of work. It needs to be widened. It needs better transit opportunities. It has a lot of congestion. It's gotten a lot worse. I've lived there my entire life, but the road has become extremely congested in the last 20 years. There's been a lot of growth to our south, down the Lorton part of Fairfax County. About 50,000 new people live down there now that weren't there 20 years ago since they closed the prison. We have a lot of growth in Prince William County, and we have people pushing up through us, trying to cut the corner into D.C. to avoid the mixing bowl and the Tyson's backups and whatever. And all that congestion has really sort of stymied development in a lot of ways. The Route 1 corridor and the condition of it is really the number one issue in my district. There's a lot of, I think, other issues ancillary to that, but that's been my number one focus, is trying to bring some kind of improvement to that road and that corridor, better economic development, better jobs, trying to get our commutes down. It's also a very unsafe road. A point I made on the floor of the House the other day is that in the last 3 years there's been 7 pedestrians killed on Route 1, 55 people hit by cars. It's about 1 person per mile in the last 7 years, and killed about 8 people per mile injured in the last 3 years, which I'm not sure there's another stretch of road in the state that is that dangerous for pedestrians. And it's just a problem that we got to start dealing with.
Now, you mentioned as far south as Lorton. How far north does your district run along Route 1?
It basically runs almost to the Alexandria city line. Okay. It comes really close to that, and there's a little bit. I actually picked up a little bit of Fort Belvoir. I forgot to mention that too in redistricting. I picked up 2,000 people, but only 80 voters, because they're all military folks. But there were 20 votes cast in that precinct in my election. But my district now goes down to the Fairfax County Parkway, where it comes in through Fort Belvoir.
Great, great. So there have been some fairly contentious issues over the last 3 weeks, some of which started last year. One that is in court now, and that relates to congressional redistricting. Can you tell us where things stand on that?
Yeah, congressional redistricting, actually that has changed in terms of my constituents. Some of them are getting a new congressman. But last year we passed, over my no vote, a bill to redistrict. The House of Delegates passed legislation to do congressional districts. And our legislation, we were told, was basically the legislation that was requested by all of the incumbent congressmen. And I'm somebody that believes in nonpartisan redistricting. I've said that since the day I got elected. I don't think politicians ought to be picking their voters. I think the voters ought to pick their politicians. And I didn't think the process was appropriate. The governor had a nonpartisan redistricting commission, which made a proposal. There was a set of colleges that did a college student competition that made a lot of good proposals, and I thought we should be looking at those instead of a partisan option. So the House chose not to do that. They accepted the Republicans and the majority caucus in our chamber proposed the congressman's solution. We passed it. The Senate passed a different version. The two sides basically didn't negotiate after that, and it bogged down. And from my point of view, the constitutional clock ran out. Our Constitution says that we have to complete redistricting within the year 2011. We didn't do that, and after that, we were sworn in on January the 6th. As soon as we got back, the day we were sworn in, usually the swearing-in day is a bunch of ceremony and hugs and whatnot. There's not a whole lot of real business that's done, but this time, the Privileges and Election Committee actually went back in the corner of the chamber, had a P&E committee meeting, passed out a redistricting bill, which was then put on the floor. It was put on a special calendar, which was given to us right before the State of the Commonwealth address that night, so that it could be then debated on the floor the second day we're in session, which was pretty unprecedented, extremely fast. We didn't have much debate about it. We had a little bit of a debate, but some of us wanted to present nonpartisan plans for debate. It all happened so fast we couldn't do that, and we ended up passing this partisan plan again because of the change of control of the Senate. They've already passed it. I expect the governor's going to sign it any day now, but there's also litigation going on right now, and just yesterday a judge found, I think, my recollection, what I read in the news reports, was that the judge found that we may have run the clock out, and in fact that what we're trying to do is illegal. But I don't think a judge has definitively found that, but they've rejected a motion to dismiss on similar grounds, and so that whole process is hardly done yet. But in terms of my district will now entirely be within the 8th Congressional District. Before, my district was split. About 60% of it was in the 8th, and about 40% of it was in the 11th Congressional District, represented by Congressman Connolly. And now my entire district will be within Jim Moran's seat, if the plan we adopted goes through. But we'll see what the judge, the court's going to have the last word on this, and we'll see what happens.
And of course, I think the Department of Justice will be involved in the review as well.
Department, under the Voting Rights Act, because of Virginia's history, the Department of Justice has to approve anything that we do. And that process usually takes at least 30 to 60 days. And we won't know where DOJ stands on any of that probably till March. And this has also created, one of the reasons we have to do it within 2011 is so that there's time to have primaries. And there's all kinds of problems with deadlines in terms of when people have to get their signatures and whose signatures they have to get and which signatures count and when you can do absentee balloting and all that. And there's talk about emergency legislation to try and fix all those things, which is a whole other nightmare. Pushing this into this year created a lot of problems, and I think at the end of the day, this is all going to be managed by a court because of the box that this is all we put ourselves in. So,
and of course, there's other legislation that goes hand in hand with these issues, dealing with a requirement that voters have a picture ID in order to identify themselves when they're at the polls.
Yeah, for the last 3 years now, there's been an effort to try and require people to basically prohibit them from voting unless they have, there's been different versions, but unless they have picture ID or unless they bring certain paperwork with them to the polls. The first year I was elected, I was one of only 3 members that stood up and fought against this legislation on the floor of the House. I did that for a number of reasons. Number one, it's just bad policy. Right now in Virginia, you don't have to have an ID to vote. They ask for it, but if you don't have it, you sign an affidavit saying that you are who you say you are. And if you don't tell the truth, you're subject to being prosecuted for a felony. And I think that's plenty of disincentive to people. But beyond all that, what I think this is all really motivated by is politics. I don't think it has anything to do with trying to prevent voter impersonation. We haven't had a single documented case of voter impersonation in this state in anyone's recent memory. I have asked the patrons of these bills every single year on the floor of the House, can you tell me a single documented incidence of voter impersonation in the United States? They tell me they can't think of anything. It's political. And when I think of my own experience in my district, I was out knocking doors in my first race. Came across, I was knocking right around my old high school, West Potomac, and I went into a home and I was talking to a guy and his wife, and I looked at the registered voter list, and I said, this list says there's somebody here who's 105 years old. Her name was Maddie Lou Ware. And I said, is there really somebody who's 105 years old here? And they said, oh yeah, she's right over there in that room. And I went over and talked to this woman. And Miss Ware had registered to vote for the presidential election. She's a 105-year-old African-American woman. And she had registered to vote for President Obama. And I'm pretty sure she doesn't have a driver's license, because I don't think she's doing a lot of driving. And this legislation photo ID legislation would prohibit her from voting. If you lived 105 years old, you made it that far, I think you have every right to vote, and you shouldn't have to prove yourself or go through these extra steps. I had another woman, 96-year-old woman. Her name was Mildred Downing. She was an original owner in one of my neighborhoods down the Stratford Landing, where I used to play baseball. And I saw her at her door. She still lives by herself. And I talked to her at her door, and she told me, she doesn't drive anymore, but that I offered her an absentee ballot. She wouldn't take it. She said, no, I voted at the polling place. I said, do you need us to give you a ride? No. I said, okay, fine. And so on election day, I was actually standing at Stratford Precinct all day, and this car pulled up, passenger door opens up, and out comes Miss Downing with her walker. And she comes up to me on the sidewalk and says, I told you I was going to be here to vote, and I'm here. But it's pretty clear to me Miss Downing probably does not have a driver's license either. She's 96 years old, uses a walker. She doesn't need one. She has a bank account. She doesn't need all these formal IDs. I have a not a monastery, but not a nunnery either, but I have 30 nuns.
Okay.
Convent. A convent, yeah, in one of my precincts. I've never been in it. I've seen the outside of it, but I'm told that these nuns spend a lot of time in there praying. A lot of them don't wear shoes. I don't think any of them wear shoes. They don't leave a lot. I don't think they have driver's licenses. And the Supreme Court case that vetted all this actually had to a bunch of nuns that were denied their right to vote in Indiana. But, I mean, there's people like that you don't think about that don't have licenses. And, this is mainly going to hit the elderly. It's going to hit people, for example, who lost their driver's licenses. The DMV told me there's 20,000 people a year that report their licenses being lost. If you happen to lose your license in the week before the election, that means you can't vote. There are 500,000 license suspensions in Virginia every year. Police officers sometimes take those licenses. They're taken in court. If you don't take the time to go and get your license reinstated before the election, then you can't vote. I don't think these things have anything to do with voting. Voting is a fundamental constitutional right. Your right to freedom of speech is not conditioned on having an ID. Your right to freedom of religion is not conditioned on having an ID. Fundamental constitutional rights, you don't attach strings to them from my point of view. And I think this is bad legislation. It's totally partisan. And I'm going to keep fighting it as I have for the last 3 years because I think it's just wrong.
Great examples, and to just build on that further, those elderly women may have been born at home as well and may not have birth certificates, and that's a significant impediment.
Well, no, see, that was another issue that was raised. It brings up another story, but in the first year we argued this, one of my colleagues, Delegate McClellan, pointed out that if you're African American and you were born before about 1940 in this state, there's a very little chance you were born in a hospital because our hospitals were segregated and wouldn't allow black families to give birth there. And if you're born at home, it's a lot less likely you'll have a birth certificate than if you're born in a hospital. So establishing your identity or bringing these kinds of formal proofs of your identity to a polling place is not as easy as a lot of people think. I was knocking doors at my last election, met a guy named Paul Ferguson. He was 84 years old, living in an apartment complex across the street from the old multiplex cinema in my district. And I wrote about him on my blog. Mr. Ferguson grew up in my district. My district has one of the oldest historically black neighborhoods in Fairfax County in it. It's called Gum Springs. He grew up on a farm in my district, which of course today doesn't have any farms left. He went to, I think he named off a number of black schools that don't even exist anymore, one-room shacks that used to be there. And he was telling me about milking cows and raising pigs and all the other things he did when he was a kid. He ended up serving in World War II. Showed me all his commendations he had. He had pictures of himself serving. Of course, it was a segregated army back then. Served his country. And he worked at Fort Belvoir for another 20 years. He told me he was in charge of shoe repairs there for 20 years. But he served his country. And now he's living in an apartment. Doesn't get around much. He doesn't walk very fast. But, I wonder whether exactly what paperwork he has or whether he even drives anymore. I don't think he does. But the man served his country. And been through a lot in life. I mean, these are not the kinds of people you need to be asking to jump through hoops to come and prove their right to vote. They are who they say they are. People don't commit felonies to vote. When people commit voter fraud, they typically try and do it on a much broader scale. They typically try and take down a machine or stuff a box. They try and change hundreds of votes at once. Changing an election one vote at a time is incredibly risky, incredibly inexpensive, and incredibly stupid, and nobody does it. And so I just don't think these proposals are, I think they're mean-spirited, they're partisan. I just don't think they're good.
Virginia does not seem to be alone in this effort, at least. About 20 other states over the last few years have engaged in this type of activity. We have a presidential election coming up this year. Some people say there's no coincidence there.
Now, there's no question there's a national effort going on that's been well documented. When the Supreme Court approved the depriving those nuns of the right to vote about 5 years ago, ever since then there's been a slew of these bills across the country. And the Department of Justice blocked it in South Carolina because of South Carolina's history of racial discrimination. And I wouldn't be surprised if we actually pass legislation like that here in this state, that they do the same thing to us. But we'll see.
To what extent does allowing the casting of a provisional ballot help if one can't produce ID?
That's the proposal is that if you don't have your valid ID, you cast what's called a provisional ballot. Most people don't know about provisional ballots because they're very rarely cast. I think in my election there were 4 out of, I think, 18,000 votes cast. Provisional ballots, what happens is they don't count your vote on election day in the precinct. They put them in an envelope and they take them back to the county registrar's office, and they're counted in what's called the canvass the day after the election. In order for your vote to be counted at the canvass, you have to get to the canvass to defend yourself, to prove who you say you are, who you say you were, while the electoral board, the 3-member electoral board, decides, whether or not, you were really Scott Surovell or you were really somebody else pretending to be Scott Surovell. And so I find it hard to believe that all these people that don't have licenses, either because they're elderly and don't need them anymore, or they're nuns and don't have them, or because they lost their license, or because their license was suspended. First of all, I'm not sure many of these people have cars. The government center where the canvass is done is 45 minutes from my district in good traffic, and of course the canvass always starts at 9 a.m. on the Wednesday after the election. Getting to the government center from my district in rush hour will take you at least an hour. If you want to get there by public transit, it's at least 3 bus transfers, maybe 4, probably a 2-hour trip to get there and 2 hours back. And the idea that any of these people are going to actually go and prove their identity, go prove their vote, is preposterous, which is why a provisional ballot doesn't help the situation at all.
Tell me, let's refocus back on your district and especially that Route 1 corridor, because I'm pretty familiar with it. I used to live in that immediate area some years ago, and you're absolutely right. I mean, there's a lot of blight there. A lot of businesses have closed over the last few years. Transportation issues are really, really tough. What needs to be done, especially in the area of transportation? You know, the governor's got another transportation package, which basically takes sales tax money now to devote to transportation.
Well, it's a complicated problem. First of all, there's a lot of congestion, and we need the ability to move more people up and down the road. Right now, businesses won't locate there. We can't read. We have a parcel, this multiplex property I mentioned.
Yes.
It's sat empty for 6 years because it's basically at the middle, the biggest bottleneck in my district, and it's almost impossible to get to and from it during congestion because during rush hour because it's so congested. Even on weekends, it's awful. And it's only 7 miles from Washington, D.C. If you show me another 7-acre piece of land, or another 12-acre piece of land, 7 miles from D.C. that sat empty for 6 years in Fairfax County, I'd like to know where it is, because I don't think it exists. And so we got to get the capacity to move more people. Personally, I think extending the yellow line, the metro, from Huntington, all the way down through Hybla Valley, down through Woodlawn, through Fort Belvoir, and ending at Lorton, I think that's what we need to do. The steps haven't been taken at all to tee that up. And that's also probably a 10 to 20 year process. And we have to have solutions before that. And so in the short term, last session, Senator Puller and I got a resolution through to study transit options in the Route 1 corridor, which is the first step to get the road widened and to bring more transit. And what the state's doing right now is studying whether there are any interim options we can do to enhance transit in the Route 1 corridor in the meantime. Route 1 has more people riding buses on it than any other part of Northern Virginia right now, and we need to improve that. We also need to change the development patterns on Route 1, which is part of what the study is going to look at, so that people will, we have more what's called transit-oriented developments where people will be less reliant on cars, more reliant on transit. Also, so we don't have so many people getting killed and injured on the road right now because of its current condition. So from my point of view, there's a multi-step process. We need to look at the short to medium term. What can we do in the short to medium term to enhance transit? And then long term, I think we need to focus on bringing Metro to that corridor. I think we brought Metro, you would see growth in that corridor like they have from Clarendon, the Clarendon Metro corridor. There's no reason that part of the county shouldn't have it. It's 7 miles. It's the longest commercial stretch in Fairfax County. 7 miles long. It's longer than Tyson's Corner stretch on Route 7. 7 miles long. It sits between two exits off the biggest highway on the East Coast. It's got some of the tallest real estate in Fairfax County, Beacon Hill, where you can see the cathedral, the Washington Monument, the Capitol. You can see the river from 180 degrees around. Perfect place for office buildings, for condominiums, for that kind of development. It's in close proximity to D.C. All we need is the infrastructure to support the redevelopment that needs to happen. The governor's transportation plan, aside from the fact that it steals from schools and it steals from public safety and health care to pay for itself, and it also asks Virginians to pay 100% of the contribution, whereas things like gas taxes are paid by out-of-staters in part, it only provides $100 million a year. The widening of Route 1 is an $800 million project. Extending of Metro, probably $3 to $8 billion. The governor's plan, $100 million a year, is not even a drop in the bucket. We need much bigger solutions if we're going to bring success to areas like the Route 1 corridor.
And of course, the tax word in terms of gas or anything else is verboten to a lot of your colleagues, and the gas tax hasn't been raised since what, 1986?
Gas tax was last raised when the year that I got my first car, and I was a junior at West Potomac High School. I gave this speech the other day. The song of the year was Faith by George Michael. It was the year Ronald Reagan nominated Bork to take the place of Lewis Powell in the Supreme Court. It's been a long time. And the purchasing power, Virginia's gas tax today is 17 cents a gallon. Back when we enacted that, I wasn't here, gas cost 89 cents a gallon. And the gas tax was, what, that makes it 20% of the price of gas. The purchasing power of 17 cents today is about 7 cents. And that's because labor's up, concrete's up, steel's up, all these things are up. At the end of the day, gas is a user fee. It's designed to measure your use of the road. The more you drive, the more you pay. I've been clear that I think that's something we need to look at. I've co-sponsored a bipartisan bill by Delegate Watts and Delegate Rust. And part of the solution in that bill is gas tax. It also has some other options in it as well, which I think we ought to look at, because gas taxes at the end of the day are not going to solve the problem. You got people like me that drive a hybrid. I'm paying half as many taxes per mile as the average person because of the fuel efficiency of my vehicle. There's going to be people driving electric cars. We haven't figured out how we're going to get those people to pay for the road they're on. There's other things we need to look at as well. But what's going to take is a governor is going to step up and exercise some leadership to get his party behind it, to bring the kinds of solutions to the table that we're going to need. And until the governor steps up, all you're going to see is these small little incremental fixes, and everybody claiming success for them, when in fact they're just really sort of small, marginal steps.
Talk to us a little bit about educational needs that you're hearing about. Of course, the governor has indicated, $438 million for K through 12. Part of that, substantial part of that, is for the retirement system. What are you hearing from your constituents and others?
A couple things. First of all, let me talk about higher ed first. For the first time in the history of the state, families are paying more to send their kids to Virginia schools than the state is providing in the form of tuition. We've cut higher ed so hard that today you were seeing families contribute at historically unseen of levels since we established the modern university system in the state. To me, that's unsustainable. We can't focus all the burden of these tax cuts on families, which are at the same time getting their college investments creamed by the stock market and are having enough problems making ends meet. We're pushing every time the budget heads south, we start saying, well, who else can throw some money in? And we start looking at middle-class families. That's been going on since I was in college at JMU. That's when it started, right around 1990, when the recession hit in 1990. And tuitions are skyrocketing because of that. We have these colleges are taking more and more out-of-state kids in because of that. And there's fewer and fewer spots for Virginia kids.
We've got about a minute left, but I want
that's something we got to change. But in terms of K through 12, the governor his budget actually proposes not to fully fund K through 12 education as compared with what's been suggested for purposes of inflation. To me, that's wrong. Education is our future. Our public education system is the great equalizer. It's what gives everybody an opportunity. I don't think it's something we need to be cutting. We cut it on the last budget over my objection, and I don't think we can keep cutting K through 12. So we can get more money into it.
Great. Well, thank you for being here, Delegate Scott Surovell.
Yeah.
Thank you for your public service.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans. Thanks.